What I'd like to share with you today are some observations, a summary, if you will, of current events, a talk which I've tried to do before, mostly around loose house sows and welfare in terms of the sow. We'll try and take it up a bit today and look at some bigger trends. And what I thought could be interesting to share with you is some really groundbreaking research into how our mind works when we take strategic decisions that has helped other industries really step back and think about how we think, so to speak. So I'll try and take you through that. I like to start with this because remember, we're in a consumer-driven industry, and perception is shaped in the mind of that consumer. That's an old picture of me on top of loose house sows. And that is a topic that Angela will cover in great depth. But with that, I'll only say we're up against very skilled consumer organizations, research, NGOs that know very well how to frame a debate, frame questions, and frame images in the minds of consumers, legislators, governments. So I think it's high time that we reflect on how we position ourselves against that and what our strategy should be. You face an immense amount of strategic decisions. Where do we stand? Where do we stand on welfare? Where do we stand on castration? Where do we stand on euthanasia? Where do we stand on loose house sows? More strategic questions than I think most of us have seen in the last 2 decades. And I guess my ultimate view and stand is, as an industry, it is extremely dangerous not framing and being progressive in the discussion. Simply standing back. I like saying, I really don't care if you turn left or right, but don't stand in the middle of the road. Could be castration, could be loose house sows. I'm not here to push you one way or another. I'm here to say, make damn sure you know where you want to take the discussion and what your must-win battles are. Because we've seen very grim examples in Europe of what happens if you're not driving the debate. Don't mistake driving it for surrendering to every welfare-driven demand there is in the world, but simply take it as a strategic intent to take your industry in the desired direction. So what's different now is that as a US industry, you have an export worth $7 billion. What was your export worth 10 years ago? You have a $7 billion business you need to protect. And whether you like it or not, that involves tough questions that some of you find invasive to your privacy, to your freedom, to your right to farm, all that good stuff. But I'm here to tell you, you better get used to it. So make sure you know your agenda and make sure you work together as an industry driving that agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the sow herd in the EU, welfare, a Nobel Prize, antibiotics, MRSA, if some of you are familiar with that, we'll talk a little bit about that. What's happening in the EU? Really, not a lot. We're pretty stable. We're right at that 250 million pigs a year. Well, if you dive, I apologize, it's not the best slide. If you dive in, actually quite a bit is happening. And the strong producing countries, Spain, Germany, are pulling out and pulling ahead. So we're seeing smaller, some Eastern European countries that really struggle to make a profitable production, reducing numbers, and strong, big, integrated, domestically producing countries increase their production base. So on the surface, you might say, EU is stable. Well, really it isn't. We're just reshuffling behind the scenes. On a totally output base, we might be stable, but bigger countries, you'll see swine production go away in some smaller Eastern European countries and continue to rise in Spain and Germany. And also in Germany, there's a massive realignment of a producer base going on, given that we have a very large production base in Bavaria with small producers. If you say there's 2.4 million sows in Germany, 500,000 of those sows are in farms with less than 50 sows. And there is a massive realignment going on there. African swine fever. Some we haven't had to deal with before. As you can see, there's no African swine fever in Russia or Belarus. Just all the wild boars happen to trend right here on this border. But no, they choose not to participate in this update. Obviously, we have a large drift of wild boars across Russia, Belarus, Ukraine into EU countries. Wild boars, we usually thought, we shoot them, we're done. Actually, we know now that they work in larger groups of 20 to 30 wild boars, and if you start shooting into a group, they disperse. There's a study done where they tagged boars in Russia, and some of those they found in Italy. So they're all over the place. And for Poland and Germany, the shooting of wild boars for game is a massive industry. We have a large pull towards bioenergy. Biogas plants are usually fed by corn, green corn. And if there's something that wild boars like, it's green corn. So really we have a recipe for a unique environment for the habitat for wild boars. So that is definitely a massively concerning development that has a huge potential. Observers of this will say, once it gets into Germany or a major producing country, we will have massive EU intervention in terms of eradication and intervention. Where we've struggled with sort of robust responses is based on the simple fact that they cannot be assured of government payout for stamping out the herds. Basically, it's a pretty simple procedure. If you get ASF, you kill all the pigs, you put them in a hole and put lime and dirt on top and don't farm for a year, and then you move on. But somebody needs to write the check, and that the governments have been slow and reluctant to get that sorted in the regions in Russia, and basically have played a blame game, if you will, for a prolonged period of time. What's going on with welfare? I use this slide because we were coming up on a hard stop in January 13 on loose house sows. So you'll note the countries with the high compliance were the countries that have either strong welfare organizations or export. The countries with a lower compliance that you could be tempted to say don't give a damn produce domestically. So they're lobbying a government to protect jobs and a domestic industry, and as such are not very interested in complying because they don't have to send any product out the country. So now we're basically 2 years post that, so I'll share with you a few observations on what's happened. If you look at the US, and Dr. Boehringer will go into that, you're well into it, and there's a lot of strategic considerations on behalf of large corporations in the US versus a centralized producer organizations, and I think most people that's heard me talk is aware of my stand on that. But at any rate, you're looking at that $200 a sow conversion price tag to go loose, and a reality where a 5,000 becomes a 4,000 in practical terms, in terms of accommodating that. So I'll let Angela elaborate on that subject. We've passed recent legislation, independent legislation, beyond the EU, meaning that we will cut away the 30-day gestation, go loose 80% of the time from 2015. Cost about $5 a pig. Must be a bad decision. Well, if you're exporting 90% of your product, you don't necessarily have a whole lot of choice. So again, frame the discussion. What are you willing to concede? What are you willing to get back? What is an investment in protecting a $7 billion export business worth to you as an industry? So that's, I guess my thing is that you've got to frame that question. And I'll tell you this, I've seen a lot of conversions in the US, and I'm impressed at the adaptability and the way you've done it in the systems that's chosen to adapt it, and I think you're very well on the way in terms of understanding how that can be done. You're well aware of these EU legislation we go by, and so what happened? Well, we sent out warning letters to Belgium, France, Cyprus, and Greece, and then nothing happened. So unless you're exporting, unless you're a major corporation in that country, there has been no penalty on being non-compliant. And again, if you're just producing for your own domestic consumption, then you can cry jobs, rural development, security, all day long to the government. And so far, the EU has not lifted a finger in terms of doing that. If you're building new, we've worked with a cost also saying, what does it cost us to take away loose house and gestation, stalls in the first 30 days? That's about another $5, or 1 pig per sow per year. It's what we call UK compliance, because they were the first ones to put this in, saying we won't have any crates at all in gestation. We can't really see a correlation to sow mortality in terms of loose house sows, meaning it's management driven. We can get into some debates about genotypes and all that good stuff, but you cannot say that if you take 100 stall farms and 100 loose house that there is a massive difference in the mortality, because the numbers don't support that in Europe. So lots of questions, lots of unanswered questions, and a Nobel Prize in finance. When we think about decisions, I thought there's some groundbreaking work done by an American psychologist called Daniel Kahneman, who got the Nobel Prize in finance because he proved that financial markets are irrational, and he never had one finance lecture in his life, so I thought it was pretty neat he could get the Nobel Prize in finance. We've been very rational, so far. Economy rules, sort of some giants, Friedman, and just describing how we rationalize. There's some psychologists saying, hey, you better be aware of the fact that your mind takes shortcuts whenever you're presented with a decision. Something called type 1, which is a quick, what's 4 times 4 answer, and then type 2 decisions where your mind starts playing tricks with you. And that's something that I've become aware of is very much used by organizations trying to frame a discussion or frame questions in the minds of consumers, which is why I thought it'd be neat to show you a few of those examples for your entertainment, I guess. There he is. American, very clever man. Some of those you would have seen in another, I'll run through them. Basically, if I frame this choice for you, right? You can get $90 for sure. You can have 90% chance of winning 100, but 10% chance of getting nothing. This is how it comes out. Let me change that for you. What if it's $80? That's your mind telling you that now that question is fundamentally different. And your mind did that in 1 second, and you didn't realize it unless you were paying attention. What about cameras, right? Basic consumer behavior. We got ratings, we got the price, 2 cameras. All right? I just framed that choice for you. Let me frame it another way. Let me add a more expensive camera. I just pulled you into the middle. Same cameras, same rating, same price. I just added a more expensive alternative. Framing choices is something that you will have opponents do to you all day long. Compared to the Danish consumption of antibiotics, what should the consumption be in the US? Instead of, what's a reasonable consumption for the production of livestock in the US? So think about how you're being presented these questions, and more importantly, think about how consumers, how your voters, how your supporters or your antagonists are being presented with questions. Mental accounting. You can save $20 going somewhere to get this watch strap. $20. We'd buy it here, right? What is an expensive watch? Same $20. Just a different purchase. Your mind did that to you in a second again. And what about anchoring, right? ASV necktie. Think it's greater than $20. What if I asked you if it was $60? It was a really nice tie. I just raised your average projection of the price astronomically. Same thing that will happen with framing of these strategic choices in the industry all day long. And that is why, to me, it's extremely dangerous not being the one framing the questions. Or at least not being aware, very actively aware of what goes on in the mind of the consumer, of the legislator. Overconfidence, right? 96% of American drivers think they're better than average. So did Swedish drivers, by the way. We do it to ourselves all the time. Winner's curse. We think we can overcome, win. We should not dismiss these things, just be aware of them. Just step back and reflect, okay, what's the question that's on the table? What's that intended to do to the recipient? So like I said, just slow it down and be aware of it. And that book called Thinking Fast and Slow is a fantastic book on that subject, which is why he won that Nobel Prize. So basically, that's all studies, right? That's all controlled environment. But as managers, as vets, as influencers, we can influence outcomes. But just be very aware that all of this plays together in how outcomes are shaped and how opinions are formed. I won't spend more time on this because it's pretty detailed. I thought I'd share those examples with you. Basically, we tend to overestimate our control when we can't control. That's lottery. That's picking lottery ticket numbers. But actually, when we can control is what I found more interesting. We tend to underestimate what we can shape and what we can control. So think about that as we go into antibiotics here. One day my mom calls me, "What about this MRSA?" And I said, "Yeah, what about it?" "There's a town hall meeting. There's going to be 400 people there." And I come from a town of 900 people, so I thought that was a little drastic. But basically, there's this MRSA CC138, right? It's a resistant bug that grows in pigs, and it's been a case of huge controversy in Europe, and Denmark's rolled over and said, yes, we have tons of positive farms, we don't know what to do with it. It's uncertain what the correlation to human health is, all this and that, right? We didn't frame that debate. Somebody else framed it for us. And right now we're trying to backpedal our way out of how on earth we got all that nasty bugs into swine production and what we're doing about it. Meanwhile, it's very uncertain what transmission is there to humans and what the effect of having it in pig herds are. But we were late, right? Consumption. Milligrams per kilo of biomass. There's Denmark. Which country in the world do you think has the most debate on antibiotics? Probably Denmark. See how low our consumption is? But it's irrelevant. It's too late. And we didn't frame it, and we didn't establish what's a reasonable consumption. We're trying to say we will cut consumption with 20%. Yes, that's all good, but what's the end target, right? I'm seeing very similar steps now with legislation around scripted medication in the US. That was the first step in Europe. Then somebody said, hang on, you can't have vets making money selling prescription meds. That's a conflict of interest. I'm not saying that'll happen in the US, but it certainly happened in a bunch of European countries. So what is your consumption? There's standardized procedures. Again, do you want somebody to frame that question saying, compared to the consumption in Norway, what should the consumption be in the US? It's as easy as that. Not a discussion on the fact that they have 85 sows in the whole country, and they've said that they've stamped out all the MRSA herds because there were 4 of them and they had 200 sows put together. But if you're not careful, you get into that back foot framing of the questions again. Next question to me is, what's a reasonable consumption? What's a reasonable consumption for livestock production? We've never had that discussion. We've always had the, how low can we go? Right? How low can we go, and can we get another 20% off next year? So think about that, and think about those little examples as we talked before. You have pockets of strength. And I'm not just saying that because we're on a BI stage, but if you look at major viral diseases, I doubt that there's a country in the world with a higher vaccination rate than the US. You've taken preventive measures. You see many companies now framing themselves strategically around individual pig care, injection of an individual sick animal. I would also venture a guess that you're one of the countries where it's easiest to implement getting a group of pigs injected with white penicillin is not something you do in Denmark, because it's easy to turn on water meds or in-feed antibiotics. It's ingrained in your production standard that sick pigs get injected. That's a strength. You have high vaccination rate, and you can easily implement individual injection of pigs. What's your strategy? What's interesting to me is that typically you think, oh, we're excellent in Europe. We have all this excellent welfare and we know everything, right? Sweden has a tiny little national industry, and they've come at Denmark saying, we don't want your meat, we don't like your meat. It's got MRSA, you've got all these bugs, this, that, and the other, and had a big sort of little mini trade war there across the bridge. And then 2 weeks ago, they came at it from another side saying, you do blunt trauma. That's right. We do blunt trauma. You can do blunt trauma up to 30 kilos. Why? Because it's an effective way to euthanize a pig. Is it a way in North America that a consumer likes pigs to be euthanized? No. Do you have the video footage on YouTube to prove that? Yes. Have we implemented that in Europe? No. We're still blunt trauma. So the example is, as you look at your exporting market, they will pick out any particular weakness in your harness to protect the domestic industry. And if it's Denmark, Sweden is going to look at that production base and say, all right, we come at it with MRSA, didn't work. We're going to come at it with blunt trauma, didn't work. We're going to find something else. So if I'm making any sense, I'm trying to say, work that into your strategy, look at your markets for export and look at your domestic base, and then realize you have strengths. You have things that are already implemented. You have, like I said, high vaccination rate, high individual treatments, humane euthanasia. The welfare will take its course, but I think from the antibiotics standpoint, again, it's another fork in the road like it was with welfare. Be careful that somebody else doesn't take the initiative. And again, do not mistake this for me saying that we should surrender to any tree-hugging claim on the planet. I'm just saying, be in the driver's seat. And again, what are your must-win battles, right? Castration's gone in Europe. We're going to find another intervention. What if you could sell it with a non-steroidal agent? Would that be enough, right? Ultimately, loose house sows are going to go all the way. We have a guest in the audience that's built the world's biggest farm with all loose house sows, 5,000. Is that what you want? Or is that a must-win battle? Is 30-day gestating in crates, is that a must-win battle? Is a certain amount of antibiotic consumption? I'm not saying you have to go tell the world what your strategy is, but you better have one. What if you could choose between 2 cents a pig or free of charge? What if there's an option out there that might add $1 a pig? Given an inch is very commonly mistaken for surrendering. And the fact that, oh, if we give an inch, they're going to take a mile, and, oh, I'll protect my freedom to farm with a shotgun and all that. We all stars and stripesy on it. But just grasp the questions and grasp the fact that there's people out there very actively working against you, not to improve welfare, but to get you out of business. You should also think about some of the NGOs. What are their ultimate goal? It's not loose house sows, and it's not lowering antibiotic consumption. It is the abomination of pork production. Those are probably the ones you don't want to negotiate with. But again, they'll use all these little tricks. They will frame it, and they will use the visuals and the blunt trauma, which I think you did a nice job of as an industry moving forward. You've done nice things with PQA, but you've got to constantly be on the lookout saying, what's the next thing? And I'm not talking about adding cost, I'm just talking about being vigilant and having that strategy. So what is the name of the game? That's going to be very different from NGO to NGO. I mean, your most predominant one is HSUS, and we'll have similar versions of that in Europe, and those are pretty tough to negotiate with. And you'll have some that are actually actively interested in improving welfare or production parameters in a number of areas. So one of my favorites is that it's not a strategy keeps saying no comments, we have data, we need more time. We've done it again now in my home country with MRSA, and we're going to get legislation. We're going to get mandatory testing. We took it to the Supreme Court that the farms that had the testing for MRSA were not made public. Remember, there is no solid academic proof saying that this is a real, tangible health concern. But it's bad. They do the whole thing where you stand in front of the cooler saying, pig meat is bad because it's got this bug inside. And the consumer's going, yes, it must be bad. So, in between no comments, we need more time, and giving it all up is a strategic array of choices, where you as an industry got to continue to work as a whole. I know there's state differences, and there's certainly large differences on opinion on how much you should give up and when and why and all that, but I'm just saying, be aware that this is happening in real time. And as you think you got one hole or one flank covered, it's going to be another. We see that all the time. And again, what does production look like? U.S. consumer accepted production and export accepted it. Your 7 billion industries, we can segment that many different ways because it's going to go both ways. Mexico is a big market for you. Spain is firing up to get approved to export to Mexico. They're going to come at you for that export. They're going to say, we're compliant here, 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 and we can do it at this price, and the U.S. is not. So you're going to have multiple battlefields in terms of Japan, Korea, China, Russia, if they want your meat, Mexico. So it's all happening in real time, and it's very important that you are aware of these mechanisms and the challenges in front of you. Again, here's one of the ones we lost, I guess, and to me that's still mind-boggling that we're going down this road, and I don't see that. Might be me, but it looks like an extremely expensive way to kill pigs, but that's just me.